So welcome to the Bold Story Press Publishing webinar. My name is Emily Barros, and I am the founder of Bold Story Press, which is a publishing platform for women authors only. I spent 35 years in the publishing industry. As soon as I graduated from college, I grabbed my one suit and headed to New York. I wanted to be the next Maxwell Perkins. And though it didn't quite work out that way, I did spend my entire career in the publishing industry, where I published hundreds of best-selling books and where I was a sales rep, a marketing manager, a publisher, and an editor. And in my last role, I was vice president, editor-in-chief of a division of McGraw-Hill. And publishing when I started out was very different than it is today. We didn't yet have computers. When I started out as an editorial assistant, making $10,000 a year, I had a typewriter, not even a correcting typewriter. They weren't available yet. And we had so many publishing houses out there. The competition was fierce, and there were bookstores everywhere and bookstore chains everywhere. It was a very different world. People actually went to bookstores to buy their books. But over the years, there's been a lot of change. And of course, the introduction of digitization changed the industry radically, but computers and eventually online book buying has just changed the face of this industry completely. Over time, publishers started buying each other up. The medium and large publishers bought up first the smaller publishers until they were gone. And then the larger publishers started to eat up the medium-sized publisher until they were gone. And now there are just 5 traditional publishers left. And interestingly, none of them are US owned anymore. They're all owned by the Europeans. Book buying started to move online to Amazon largely, where 80% of books are purchased today. And as that happened, bookstores started to go out of business. Bookstore chains also gobbled each other up until there were just a handful left. And then one by one, they went out of business until Barnes & Noble were left just with the Barnes & Noble chain. They're the only remaining bookstore chain. Digital books are, depending on the genre, depending on the market, digital books generally sell 50-50 print to digital. In some markets, print is higher, like in young adult, but for the most part, it's about 50-50. And as I said, 80% of sales happen through Amazon. So if you're someone who wants to write and publish a book, I think it's important to think about your motivation. I've certainly talked to my authors about that over the years, and these are some of the motivations I saw most frequently. The author needs to be passionate about her topic. Usually authors who fall into this category are writing nonfiction. They are teaching someone something about a content and a discipline that they are excited about. It's also true in business, where you are sharing a way to have success in different facets of the business world. But that passion really comes through in writing, and a lack of passion really comes through in the writing. Some authors describe their writing as having a story inside of them that they feel compelled to get out. And sometimes authors talk about that as they have an idea, sort of a fully formed plot in their mind, and they sit at the screen each day and write the detail. But some authors actually describe this phenomena as having a fully formed book inside of them, where they're almost channeling the book onto the page, and everything, all the detail is there inside, which is awesome. I would love to have that experience. Some authors write to make money. Some authors write to establish themselves as an authority in their field, and more for entrepreneurs, it's becoming true that writing a text or writing a book is an important box to check, because it gives you instant credibility, and it says to the world at large that you are an expert in your area. Some authors write to leave a legacy, and we work with a lot of authors who are writing memoirs, who want to leave their story behind for to motivate and inspire others, whether they are family and friends or the world at large. You also should be thinking about for whom you are writing your book. And I used to ask my authors to fill out the marketing questionnaire before they started writing, or very early in the process, because I found that if an author has a very clear idea of their target reader, what that person looks like, how old he or she is, how educated, how much money, you know, as much detail as you can, it helps you in the process of writing that book. Because at any given time, when you're developing a story arc or you're developing characters, you have to stop and think, is that enough? You know, have I explained that enough? Will my readers get it and be engaged? Am I creating that tension that will keep the readers wanting to turn the page and stay with the book? And having a clear idea of who that reader is often helps answer that question for you. So you should think about who will want your book, who will pay for your book. That's an important one. What do you know about them, and how will you reach them? To become a published author today, you may also need to ask yourself, do you need to make any changes? And I love this quote. I have found it to always be true for myself. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And so if you have talked for many years about publishing a book someday, but your day-to-day routine isn't changing, you're not writing every day or making a plan to make that book happen, it's very possible that you are never going to write that book, and it's never going to happen. So you really need to think about what changes you need to make in your day-to-day activities in order to achieve the goal. I also love this quote by Marianne Williamson, and especially as it applies to women. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that others, people won't feel insecure around you. And I share this because after I left McGraw-Hill and before I started Bold Story Press, I started a business called Bold in Business. And I ran that business for 4 years. And the goal with Bold in Business was to teach women how to own their power in the business world. I found that too many women, most women, suffered from the same hurdles that I suffered from when I started my career. And that was people pleasing, which I learned at my mother's knee, and perfectionism, such that it kept me from speaking out in meetings. It kept me from putting forth ideas because I didn't know if they were right. And I didn't want to take the chance that I could be wrong publicly in a meeting. while at the same time, my male counterparts were just tossing ideas out right and left, and really had no fear or concern about being wrong. They were very comfortable just throwing out their ideas. And so it took me quite some time to learn to not worry about that, to stop with the perfectionism, and to be comfortable with the good enough at times in my career. And in my experience in working with women writers, they find it very difficult to end the process and say, this is a good enough draft of the manuscript, and I'm now going to share it with others, or send it to an agent, or send it to a publisher to ask about their interest. And so they keep revising and working on it year after year, and they have a difficult time saying, this is good enough, I'm going to send it off. So there are 5 basic phases of publishing, and I'm going to say a little bit about each one. This is kind of the least you should know about publishing webinar. Writing, there is no one writing style that is perfect and or guarantees success. Different authors have different writing styles, and different writing styles work for some and don't work at all for others. I have worked with authors who, and this is my own style, who download their ideas onto the page, and they just write everything they can think about their topic, all of the content that's stored in their brain, all the questions they may have, all the thoughts that they have. They put it all on the paper, and then they start to work through that content, winnowing it out, giving it shape, making decisions about, how to begin and how to end the content until they reach the format that they're looking for, and then they polish their work. So many authors start with an outline, and they write a general outline. They go back and they add subheads to their outline. Then they go back in and they write a paragraph for each chapter describing it. And then they go back in over and over again, laying down more detail until they have a finished work. Almost all writers that I work with need to do some form of research. It's possible if you're writing fiction that you won't have to do any research, but most writers have to do some. Certainly, if you're writing a nonfiction book, there's going to be research that you have to do. But even with fiction, if you are writing a historical novel, if you are writing a novel that is set in time or in a place with which you are not very familiar, you will need to research some of the details about your story, because readers hate it when you're wrong. And if it happens enough early in the story, readers stop finding you credible as a storyteller, and they stop reading the book. So research is an important part of the process. If you are a writer who has ideas and has started the process, but you get stuck in certain places, or you have trouble, you have trouble creating the content, writing as much as you should be in order to publish the book, more and more authors are turning to book coaches to help them with the process. Usually a book coach is an experienced editor, so they can help you not only with accountability, with setting up an organization and a framework in which you will work, but also they can read content as you go and give you feedback and advice. And then finally, if you want to write a book or share a story with the world, but you don't know how to write it and you don't really want to learn, there are ghostwriters out there. If you have the resources, you can hire a ghostwriter to write your story for you. I strongly recommend that you develop a writing habit, a daily writing habit. All of the good writers, accomplished writers, do write every day. Stephen King talks about when he first started out that he would walk into his office and sit down at the desk and open his laptop and start writing, and he would hold himself accountable to writing for 3 straight hours every day, and he stayed there and did it even if he was blocked or having trouble. And he believes that over time, that not unlike Pavlov's dogs, he taught his muse to show up when that laptop lid was raised, that his creative juices showed up every day during those hours, between 8 and 11 a.m. when he would sit down to write. You can set a daily goal of a number of words that you want to write before you will stop, or you can set a daily goal of an amount of time that you will sit and write. But during that time, it's important that you are writing, not researching, not revising, not editing, but actually writing. You have to make a commitment to write during that scheduled time each day. And you will have to learn how to self-edit. Most of us see things on a second read and a third read that we did not see as we were creating the content. But you may want to actually educate yourself some more if you haven't mastered grammar and punctuation. You may want to take a look again at style manual, like the Chicago Manual of Style. That's the one we use at Bold Story Press. And we make sure in the editing process that all of our books conform to the Chicago style. You will want to seek objective reviews to your writing. And by objective, I mean probably not family or friends. Our family and friends love us and they don't want to hurt our feelings. And in my experience, they will find the things that they can say good things about in your writing, and they will stay away from the areas where they think your writing needs to be reworked, or they have feedback that's less than positive. So if you really want objective feedback, it's best to join a writers group and ask other writers to read a beta version of your manuscript and give you feedback, and you do the same for them. Or find an editor whom you trust to read your manuscript and give you feedback on your organization, on your character development, on your dialogue, etc. And then finally, if you want to be a successful author, you should be reading. You should be reading constantly. If you want to write a book, if you want to write a memoir, you should be reading the great memoirs and the memoirs, the best-selling memoirs that are out there now. It will give you an appreciation for the different ways you can share your story, and it will impress upon you usually what good writing is. I mean, the best-selling books tend to be very well written. It's pretty unusual for a best-selling book not to be. The exception might be, what's the, there's a book out, kind of a tawdry book a few years ago, something with gray in it. It was terribly written. Everyone was talking about it. I tried to read it and it was awful.
50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey.
Oh no, it was.
It was so bad.
You know, it seemed to. I mean, what did it sell? Over 25 million copies.
Oh, I know.
Crazy.
I know. Yeah. So editing. There are different kinds of editing. Books that we sign at Bold Story Press, some of them need developmental editing, which is the most intensive kind of editing and also the most expensive. A good developmental editor is going to read your manuscript and be looking at the macro issues as well as the micro issues. A copy editor tends to be focused on the micro. So that's grammar and spelling, and a developmental editor is going to look at story arc. They're going to be reading for that tension that you have to create for the readers. They're going to be reading for character development and dialogue, etc. And they're going to give you feedback, usually in the margin of your manuscript. They will make changes in the manuscript, and then you have the option of accepting those changes or taking them out. They will make suggestions or criticisms in the margins saying, this doesn't work very well, you need to rewrite it, keeping this in mind. And often they will write an example of how they would do it to show you how to make those changes. So a good developmental editor is so valuable and so hard to find. A copy editor, a good copy editor is also so valuable because they're going to catch all of the little things, and larger things that need to be caught in order to put a book out in the world in as close to perfect form as possible. And you don't want grammar errors in your book that is reviewed by the New York Times or the Post. You want someone to have caught everything and corrected. And then proofreading is done after the book is set, has been to the compositor, is set in pages, and the proofreader is reading again for grammar and punctuation, but they're also reading for any errors that the compositor may have introduced. It's almost impossible for a compositor to make up a book and not have some little things introduced. And usually they are spaces where they may not belong, like an extra space after a period, or a letter cut off at the end of a word, at the end of a sentence. So a good proofreader is going to catch those kinds of issues and make sure that they're corrected. Design is usually the part of the process my authors enjoy the most. We design a cover for our books, and we do that by looking at the genre and looking at what kinds of covers are successful in the genre, in the market. And we sit down with the author and talk about the look and feel they want for their book. We ask them to bring us samples of covers that they love and covers that they hate. And we talk through, usually it's an hour-long process, talking through all of the details that an author would want to see on their perfect cover. What kind of font design, what kind of images, what kind of colors, etc. And every book also has an interior book design. Even if your book is a black and white manuscript without any art at all, any photos or images, your book still needs a design. The designer makes decisions about what font is used in the page-to-page story, and also what fonts are used and what kind of display is used for each chapter opener, for the front matter, the back matter, etc. And of course, if you do have art in your book, if you have an art program, lots of photographs or original art, you definitely need a designer who will make decisions in conversation with the editor and the author about where the art is placed on the pages of the book and where it belongs in the mock-up of the book. Production is that part of the process that includes everything from the day we say, okay, we're done with editorial, the manuscript is final, until the day the book publishes. And so that means everything from choosing your trim size, the size of the book, to what kind of paper you'll use when the book is printed. It involves getting your ISBNs, registering your copyright, It involves doing the metadata research to help you be more successful in Google searches and Amazon searches. It's all about formatting files so that you have a paperback version, a hardback version with a jacket if you want that, and an ebook version. The production manager is in charge of all of the detail and all of those decisions to be made in the process. We involve authors in most of those decisions. Some decisions are really dictated by the market. If you were to choose to self-publish your book, you can educate yourself about these choices and these decisions online. There's so much free content out there about self-publishing today. If you're not sure about what trim size you will want, you'll find an article that will explain to you how to make that decision on Google today. Trim size, as I said, is usually dictated by the market. Memoirs are almost always 6x9. Sometimes, occasionally, you see 5x8. The binding, the paperback versus hardback, if you are writing a manual of some type or a cookbook, you may want to lay flat binding, and lay flat bindings used to mean a spiral binding, but today there are lay flat bindings that are glued bindings like you would find in a normal paperback. Paper color and weight is also usually determined by the market. Fiction and memoirs are usually printed on cream paper. Nonfiction is usually printed on white paper. And then finally, after all those decisions have been made and your book is published, you will be involved in launching, promoting, and selling your book, regardless of with whom you sign. If you are lucky enough to work with an agent and a major publisher, they are still going to require that you be involved in the promotion and sales of your book. They are unlikely to even choose you for publication if they don't think you have the capability to do that. You'll want to create a book launch team of friends and family who will help you get the word out about your book once the book is published. And that's huge because there are close to 2 million books being published every year now. And that is a ridiculously huge number. We don't know exactly what the number is because so many people are self-publishing on KDP. Really, anyone who has a book manuscript can read online about how to format the file and upload it to KDP, and you have an instant book. And
what
so
is KDP? Sorry, what is KDP?
KDP is Amazon's self-publishing platform. So we don't know the numbers on KDP because Amazon won't share those numbers, but it's a huge number of books. And that makes marketing and selling your book even more challenging today than it's ever been before, because you have to find your way through that volume of new books each year to get to your potential reader and let them know that the book exists and what the book is about. And you'll do that, with a social media campaign. You'll do that with a direct mail campaign if you have a mailing list. You'll do that by getting reviews of your book and finding ways to get yourself on podcasts and blog interviews. There are several ways to publish. There isn't just one way. There is the traditional publisher, and the traditional publisher requires an agent. When I started out in publishing, that was not true. And one of the editorial assistants I started out with, she went to the trade side of the business and became editor-in-chief of the young adult fiction list at HarperCollins. And she told me the story that it was 25 years ago that they had reached the point where they were receiving I think it was 25,000 unsolicited manuscripts a year. And they simply could not keep up with that volume. They couldn't pay people to read and vet those manuscripts to find out, which ones were good and which ones weren't, because the majority of them are not. And so it was at that point that Harper decided that they needed a gatekeeper. And that's when they made the decision that no manuscripts would be considered unless they came through an agent. And the idea there was that they were using the agents to vet the manuscripts so that they weren't having to work through these huge piles. And the other traditional publishers quickly followed suit. And it's true today that really, unless you know someone, unless the traditional publisher employs your niece or a relative, that your manuscript will not be considered unless you first secure an agent who will send it to the traditional publishers. That process is a lengthy one. It can take months to find an agent that will take your manuscript, and they now have the same problems that the traditional publishers had 25 years ago, in that they have so many unsolicited manuscripts each year that they can't work their way through all of them. And so some of them actually never really read all of them, and they get tossed, without ever being read. So some agents you will hear back from. They will send you a note saying that they will take your book or not take your book, and others you never hear from. And so it can be 6 months to find that agent. And then it can be another 6 months before the agent successfully places the manuscript with a publisher. The publishing agreement with a traditional publisher usually looks like this. They give you a small advance between $5,000 and $15,000. An advance is not a gift. It is an interest-free loan, and it will be recovered by the publisher before they start to pay you royalties. And when the book publishes and starts to generate royalties, after that advance is recovered, the traditional publisher will then recover their investment in other parts of producing the book, not all parts, but other parts, and then they start to share the royalties with you. A traditional royalty with a traditional publisher is between 8 and 12%. With self-publishing, you spend all the money, you invest all the money up front, you hire your own editor, you hire your own designer, you educate yourself about all of those decisions, do your own metadata research, etc. And when the book publishes, you get all of the royalties and all of the return. A hybrid publisher, which is what Bold Story Press is a publisher that lives in between those two options, with a foot in each camp. We are a very experienced team of editors, designers, and publishing experts. All of my team have worked in traditional publishing for many, many years. We are expert at publishing books that are professionally published. And when the book publishes, we give our authors the lion's share of the royalty rather than 10%. We do require an investment upfront, a flat fee, before we begin to work with authors. And so in that way, we're asking our authors to share in the risk, to share in the investment. The business model for traditional publishers has always been that 20% of the books that they sign are successful, the other 80% are not. And so those 20% of books cover the costs and the investment of the 80%. And in hybrid publishing, we're asking our authors to share in some of that risk by paying that flat fee up front. And then at the end of the process, we give our authors 60 and 70% of the royalties instead of 10%. And editorial service providers, they're not publishers. I should also say that hybrid publishers are curated. They do not accept all manuscripts. They are not hybrid publishers. If they accept all manuscripts, they're editorial service providers. So we reject about 75% of the manuscripts we receive, and good hybrid publishers will do the same. So I love this quote: "Those who tell the stories rule the world." And it's more than time that more of those stories are told by women. So thank you for coming today. If you are on social media, I would love it if you would like us or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I hope you will think about how you will share your story with the world. And I hope you will share your story with the world. I am passionate about helping women to get their stories out there. So if you want to come off video and ask me any questions, or you don't have to come off video in order to ask me questions, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
With children's books.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was very informative. And there are not many people on this, but, so I was inspired to put together a children's book during the pandemic while we were Zooming to our grandchildren and not being able to visit them. And they loved our story. So this is with my husband as well. And so I said, well, why not put something together? And so I'm wondering about children's books, of how success, I think you were talking more about fiction, nonfiction versus children. So thank you.
So children's books are, they are challenging in a different way for a publisher. And so if you want to publish a children's book, I strongly recommend that you work with a children's book publisher, a publisher that really specializes only in that market, because there are challenges to that market that you want your publisher to really understand. And it is a very busy market, in that there are a lot of books being published every year. There are rules that apply to children's publishing that you need to understand, and your editors need to understand. I found out some of them the hard way because we were new to publishing children's books. Like one of them was, if your animals talk, they can talk to each other, but they can't talk to humans. Like, there are certain rules, in children's publishing that you need to know. So, but there are so many good children's publishers out there, and yeah, I'd strongly recommend that you look for one of those. Do you have an illustrator?
We contacted somebody, and interested, we saw a book that we just loved her artwork. Actually, our son sent it to us, and she's in the UK, and we've just been in contact with her. So, yeah.
That's a good question. I am wondering, where do you find good illustrators? My experience, unfortunately, the illustrator that the book that I sort of helped on, the illustrator died. She's actually a very accomplished artist who, her name is Clarice Smith. So she has artwork in the Smithsonian, and, she's an accomplished artist, but she did some children's artwork, and she unfortunately passed away. So I'm wondering, where else do you find these types of children's illustrators? Is there like a list? Is there, I know Scholastic does children's books, and Highlights does children's books, but I don't know, where do you usually find these people?
There are places where you find them, and I'm not going to be able to pull up the name. There's a wonderful website that I'll share with you after this meeting today, but where freelance design illustrators have registered, and we've found some good people that way. Children's books are very expensive too,
Yeah,
because you will pay a pretty hefty flat fee up front to an illustrator, and then you will also share the royalty 50-50. So
yeah,
it's expensive if you're working with an established illustrator. If you are working with someone who's starting out, you'll be able to find someone more reasonably priced, but you're going to do some research. We worked with, we published a couple children's books in our first year, and we won't be publishing any more children's picture
Right.
books. So it just because we're not expert in that market, and the obstacles are too great, to become expert. We'd prefer to work in different markets, but we learned a lot, in that first year. So you'll need to do your research.
Right. What about books on art? People who, are artists and speak to the story of art, perhaps in the international or, cultural world. Have you done anything in that area?
We have not. Again, they're very expensive to produce. Are you talking about coffee table books, or are you talking about like art education?
No, coffee table. Actually, one is in the process of being produced. I have no, I have no connection to it other than I know the people. But they, again, it's in production, and one of the things that seems to be a struggle is how do you spoke to, which I thought was fabulous, the social, the marketing part of it, and the social media and promotion. Are there particular success stories that you know about in that area that tend to be good ways to promote books in general through social media?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Well, it's more in the marketing area of not necessarily the publishing, because this has already been published or in production for publishing, but it's more about how do you market? What are some social media techniques that you've had that are useful, or direct mail techniques that are useful?
Well, again, there's a whole area of expertise for children's book marketing, and
This would be more adult. The art book. Yeah, this is not children's books. I'm sorry, I pivoted.
oh.
Yeah.
So you would likely want to work with a book publicist who knows something about the art markets, and the book publicists know how to get you featured or interviewed
Right.
in the right sites, right? You want the NPR market, not the well, I can't think of an example of the markets you don't want, but yeah, book
Right.
publicists specialize in certain markets and genres, and they have contacts in those places and can help you get the word out. So
Yeah, I think you're right. The NPR market. Actually, this particular book has an introduction, believe it or not, by Sharon Rockefeller. And of course, she is WETA and National Punch. So I didn't even think about the whole NPR angle of it.
well, Mindy, I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one and give you, some specific advice if you have a manuscript.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure.
That'd be great. And I actually am going to promote your Bold Press, because I think in particular women artists who I deal with, and women educators and so forth, are just not getting as much serious attention from my vantage point, but I'm in a specific world that may not be the whole universe.
Right, right. It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. So yeah, that's our passion. Amplifying women's voices. So
Right.
yeah, well, thank you both for coming. And Martha, I will also, we have been talking about doing a webinar just on children's publishing, because we have some resources, people who would come and help us do that, who are kind of expert in that market. So we will definitely keep you in mind for that.
I would love to also be in that as well,
Okay,
for my
okay.
own, because NEH actually works from K-12 and lifelong learning, the endowment. So just promoting that area to our network would be great.
Okay, that sounds good.
Excellent. I would love to talk with you separately. I don't have your contact, but
I'll email you after and we'll set up a time to talk.
lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
Meeting.
So
Thanks
one more quick question. Sorry.
yeah.
So once the book is published, I guess if we do it independently, then we own it. But let's say we do it with you. Who owns the book after it's published?
If you do it with a traditional publisher, they own it. So they require copyright. If you do it with self-publish, obviously you own it. And most hybrid publishers do have the authors keep the copyright. So if you were publishing with us, the copyright would be in your name, and then you license to us the right to publish it and produce it and put it out into the market. And so the contract is very specific about, some hybrid publishers would require you to keep that license for the life of the copyright. And of course, a copyright is pretty long period of time. We have a 30-day escape clause because frankly, we don't want to work with authors who don't want to work with us anymore. So if for any reason you don't want to, it's not going well or you're not happy, you just give us 30 days notice and you can leave. So yeah, traditional publishers keep the copyright in your name. I'm sorry, keep the copyright. Hybrid publishers keep the copyright in your name.
And if it's in our name, once that contract's over, then we own the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you still own the book while the contract is in place, but you can't sign with two publishers at the same time. The contract prevents you from doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not a good idea to do that.
Yeah.
All right.
So
well, thank you very.
thank you
this was
both.
terrific. Thank you for sharing your great wisdom, and I look forward to talking to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.